Hey, everybody. I guess today we're going to learn a little bit about JavaScript as it pertains to something called the D.O.M, which is a very scary, large, weird word. But I promise it's not that intimidating. In fact, it's really integral to how the web works. When you're going around web pages and things are just flying around and you're clicking on things and you're typing stuff into boxes, the thing that's kind of underlying all of that interaction is something called the D.O.M, and it's kind of how the browser works in a visual way. So we're going to hop right into it. And I guess I'll start by introducing myself. So my name is Sandile Keswa. Very, very unusual name in the United States, but I assure you, in South Africa, it's quite normal. I work for Google as a front-end software engineer. And basically what that means is I build kind of front ends, so websites, web apps, visual interfaces for people to use for the most part, on top of like backend services like, APIs that handle education services like Classroom, or APIs that handle storage services like Google Drive. I build a nice, pretty veneer that you use when you go to drive.google.com or classroom.google.com. So before we get going, I think it just makes sense to break the ice a little bit. It's just going to make it a lot easier to have a nice little conversation. It's going to make it a lot more casual. So here's my icebreaker question, and it's a pretty tough one. Okay, if you were forced to eat only one thing for the rest of your life, you can only choose one food. Which food would it be? So to answer this question, you might want to type in your answer in the chat. Sushi? Okay. I don't know. I feel like sushi could get old, but that's neither here nor there. Pasta, that's interesting. Rice? Oh my God. What a bland existence that would be. KFC, I'm feeling KFC. That, I can kind of vibe with that. Salad? Okay. All right. It's the holidays. You don't have to be all healthy like this. Salad for the rest of your life. Come on, Olivia. Get out of here. Ice cream? Okay, I feel that. Pliables, all right. Tacos? Me and Emma have a spiritual connection because tacos was my answer to this question. Tacos are so dynamic. Breakfast tacos. You know what I mean? You can put anything in a taco. You could put broccoli in a taco and it would still be a taco. It's incredible. It's like cheating. Yeah, no, these are all great answers. But ultimately, I hope nobody ever has to eat one thing for the rest of their life anyway. So it's a nice little exercise. Okay, so here's the agenda. So I don't know. I'll call this talk like kind of like a three-stepper. At the beginning, we're going to talk about how HTML talks to JavaScript in the first place. How HTML and JavaScript relate is actually pretty important to understanding the D.O.M. So the natural next step after that is to talk about the D.O.M itself. So that's where we're going to be in like the middle phase of the talk. And then in the latter phases, we'll talk about the inspector, which is basically just a development tool that ships with most browsers that allows you to kind of take a peek at the D.O.M underlying any particular page. And, the confluence of those three kind of steps in the agenda will really help you be able to reason about the D.O.M, manipulate it, work with it going forward. And that's really the goal of this talk. Okay, how does HTML talk to JavaScript? Let's find out. Well, all web browsers pretty much understand three main languages. And a lot of you are probably familiar with them or have heard of them before because they're pretty famous. We got HTML. So HTML is kind of the structure of the document. You've probably seen it before. It looks like a bunch of like opening tags and closing tags. It has divs and body and head, but it also has like inputs, stuff like that. So it's kind of the structure of the page without CSS, which is kind of the presentation of the page, which has all sorts of styling, padding, color, font, border, right? It's all the fun stuff goes inside the CSS, and it's what really makes the HTML look a particular way, because without CSS, everybody's web page would look kind of the same. I'm sure you've seen an unstyled page before. It's a bunch of Times New Roman and like bullets, and like it's really tall and not very wide, and everything looks like it's literally just a Word document. Well, that's because that's what HTML is, unless CSS steps in and moves stuff around. And then JavaScript is really the brain of the page. Like when you click on something and something about the page changes, and I'm sure you have this experience all the time, like something is doing that. Like the browser doesn't know how to make buttons do stuff on its own. You got to teach it, and how you do that is with something called JavaScript. And it's like a full programming language that's kind of available in any browser. And it's a very powerful programming language. And so we're going to see how JavaScript actually does, interact and manipulate the page. So generally an HTML file, .html, is where HTML lives. And it's like a whole file, and it's kind of the entry point of your website. Like when you load a website, you're actually almost always loading an HTML document. CSS is generally written in a .css file, but it can also be like kind of inlined into the HTML as well. JavaScript is also typically in a .js file, but recently there have been slight changes to how JavaScript is loaded. So you have a lot more options now. So you can use things like .es files or .module files to load JavaScript. We're not going to talk about that in this talk, but if you're interested in that sort of thing, I totally recommend you go and research JavaScript ES modules. It's pretty cool, and it's kind of like the direction we're headed in as the web develops, but it's not necessarily where we are now. Okay, so the bare minimum you need to create a web page is just an HTML file, just one. CSS and JavaScript are entirely optional. In fact, there are a lot of pages that have very little CSS or JavaScript at all. In fact, the further back in time you go, like the less styled the pages will get. I don't know if any of you have seen like really old websites, but they're very blinky and they got tables and all sorts of stuff. But they don't really have CSS. It's just HTML doing that. So you can really get away with just HTML, and a lot of sites do, but really where the web has gone is that you kind of need all three to build a great experience. So this is the structure of an HTML tag, right? So you got an opening tag. So that kind of declares that like we're in a new tag. A tag is kind of just an element of the page. It's a piece of the page. In this case, a paragraph, right? And you can tell what kind of tag it is by kind of taking a look at the first letter in the opening tag, right? You can also ascribe attributes in the opening tag that kind of configure how the tag works, identify it, in this case, with the ID attribute. And it gives the element a unique name. So you can look it up later in many cases, but it's also so you can style it. You can also give it something called a CSS class, which is another way to identify it for later styling. A lot of elements support giving textual content. Like in the case of the paragraph, the content between the opening and the closing tag belongs to the paragraph, and it's kind of the responsibility of the paragraph to format. Every time you visit a web page, your browser downloads all the files that are listed on that page. So what you've probably noticed is when you go to a web page, it's not all there right away, right? Pieces of it kind of pop in as you like load the website. And that's because HTML is like the entry point of your website, but ultimately all the little pieces that make up the website are usually separate files that also have to get downloaded from the same server. So your browser pretty much decides which CSS, JavaScript, or images, videos, etc., to load by first loading the web page, so the HTML, and then reading the content of that HTML. So this is an example of what I mean. So on the left, we have index.html, right? So this is just an HTML page, right, that says hello, right? But it needs a JavaScript file to load so that, it can add some functionality to the page. right? How we know that is that script tag that is kind of highlighted with red. So the script tag specifies that we're loading a file called script.js. And script.js is on the right-hand side. And all it's going to do is it's going to log something to the console when it gets loaded. This is a pretty common pattern. It's not the only way to load JavaScript, but it's a pretty canonical way to do so. JavaScript is referenced by a script tag and is executed as soon as it gets finished downloading by the browser. So, the browser, as I was saying before, is kind of like this resource manager. Like it's looking at your HTML page, it's saying, oh, there are like 3 JavaScript files, 3 CSS files, there are a few images. I'm going to go out and load them. Now, most resource files don't really have an effect on the page unless they're CSS or JavaScript, because in that case, JavaScript gets like executed right away by the browser, because JavaScript it's literally code, it's functionality. And then CSS gets applied to the existing document. So that kind of ties into like the relevance of the DOM. The DOM is a really critical piece of understanding how a website actually gets rendered. I'm sure you've seen like an HTML file on one side and then seen like what it looks like in the browser and wondered how on earth it got from point A to point B. Because it's almost like magic, right? You're looking at like raw text and then it turns into these beautiful shapes and boxes and buttons and images and videos. How does the browser keep track of all that? Well, that's called the DOM. The DOM stands for Document Object Model. It's a really fancy way of saying an internal representation of the document. Because like storing the document in text, like remembering every individual letter, like for the browser doesn't really make that much sense. Like the text itself isn't that relevant to how the browser reasons about how the page should look. It'd actually make a lot more sense to represent it as kind of like a patchwork or a network of little nodes that are organized into something of a hierarchy. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So this is an example of what your browser is doing. It gets an HTML file, breaks it down, looks at it, traverses it, and then kind of repurposes it into a tree of things, right? So a document becomes a node called document, which has children nodes. One of them is HTML. Inside HTML, you might have a head node. Inside that, you might have a title node. And that title node has text like my title. So this is called a tree structure. And it makes a lot of sense for, actually manipulating and changing and representing something as abstract as like a bunch of text in the browser. So the DOM refers to how a web browser sees a web page. And it's basically as a hierarchy of objects. And it just makes everything a lot easier to process, store, and manipulate. So this is kind of a zoomed in version of what you saw before. This is DOM, right? It's a hierarchy of nodes that represent the page. So the root node is usually document, right? It's kind of it's the very tippity top of the tree. It kind of encompasses the whole document, and that's why it's named that way. The body tends to be like the visible representation of the document, and the head tends to be the resources and metadata that are associated with that document. In this particular case, the body has an H1, right? That's a heading, and it has a paragraph, and they both have text, and they'll style that text with some default styling because there's no CSS in this DOM, at least now. Objects in the DOM hierarchy are called DOM elements. And you've probably heard the word element before, but DOM element basically just means it's a piece of the page. That's it. And DOM elements have a bunch of properties that they get assigned, but really all you have to really think about is that picture of the tree of elements, right? The tree of DOM nodes in the DOM, like a div and a body and a paragraph and an H1. Those are all elements, but they're really just pieces of the DOM tree. So here's some famous examples of DOM elements, and you've definitely seen some before. So there's a paragraph, which we've just seen. There's an image element that shows an image, in this case, an image located at hello.png on our server. There's a text field. I'm sure you filled hundreds, thousands of text fields in your day. It's literally just that white box where you start typing in and the text starts showing up. That's a D.O.M element. And it kind of just comes for free when you're using HTML. It's pretty cool. Same thing with video. Like, one of the crazy things about browsers is that you can just tell it with a video tag, like, hey, put this video right here, and it will just spin up a whole video player for you, like with all sorts of controls and volume and pausing and playing. It's pretty awesome. And you kind of get this like right out of the box. You also have the button tag, right? You've seen a button tag. It's basically just like, it looks like a dinky little button, and you hover over it and it glows a little bit, and you click it, it does a little animation. And you get that out of the box too. You don't have to actually style that. Like, the browser has its own inherent styling that changes based on what operating system you're using. And then there's table. This is kind of a throwback to when HTML was, let's say, both styling and structure, because CSS didn't always exist. CSS kind of came along later. So there are all sorts of remnants of that in HTML. Like, there's something called the blink tag, which it's hilarious and fun, and you should definitely try it when you get the chance. But you can put like some text in there, and then you know, inside your blink, and then your close blink, and then it just makes the text blink colors. And you don't need any CSS at all. You can just do that because HTML is crazy and weird and old. But ultimately, it's pretty flexible and powerful as well. And then there are headings, and you've definitely seen some headings. You're looking at a heading right now. Examples of D.O.M elements on this slide is basically a heading. It's just big text. That's really all you need to know about that. D.O.M elements can be styled by CSS and or manipulated by JavaScript. And that's kind of the point of the D.O.M. That internal representation is really intended for mutation. It's intended for, you know, for you to move a div over to the left, or when you click a button, that it expands like a little panel, you know, where you can fill out more fields. You know what I mean? Anything interactive is made possible by the D.O.M. Okay, so here's an example. So on the left, we have some HTML. It says hello world, right? Inside a paragraph. And then we have a button that says click me, right? This is pretty, you know, obvious what's happening here. Like, we have two elements, the paragraph element and the button element, and they're appearing on the right, you know, by the browser building D.O.M and then organizing them in such a way that you can see both. So if I were to add a style tag here, so that's a paragraph selector that you're seeing with the color being set to red. So this is kind of the power of CSS. It kind of allows you to point to a pattern of D.O.M elements in the D.O.M and then apply a certain attribute to them. In this case, we're selecting all paragraphs in the D.O.M. There's only one, but it still stands. And then we're assigning its color to something that's not the default, which is red. So that's pretty powerful. But notice that it's still HTML on the left that's really running the whole show, and is effectively like the entry point of the page. So let's do some JavaScript. So instead of having a style tag, this time we have a script tag. So our script tag has a document.querySelector. So what that is it's a method that's exposed by something called the D.O.M API. And this is something that you can look up on the internet. But really, the D.O.M API is just how you interact and mess with the D.O.M from a JavaScript context. So in this case, document.querySelector is looking up all of the elements in the D.O.M that have a tag name of button. And then what it's doing is it's taking its styles object and then mutating a field called padding left, which is how far away from its parents left that it is. And you can kind of see that with click me. Click me used to be on the left, right? All the way left aligned with the rest of the document. But we're literally changing with JavaScript the styling of that element, and that's really powerful. And that's kind of like the crux of how most web pages interact with the user or change meaningfully. It's by JavaScript changing attributes, adding things to the D.O.M, removing things to the D.O.M. And that's really how most web pages with any sort of dynamic functionality work. So here's the takeaways. JavaScript manipulates and interacts with the DOM by leveraging the DOM API. For example, document.querySelector. So the DOM elements, and this is a critical piece as well, also emit something called an event when they're interacted with. So I'm sure you've always wondered, like when you're typing into a text box and like, say it's a password text box and it has some sort of label underneath it, right? And the label is saying, your password's too short. And then you type some more characters and then that message goes away. And then you delete some characters, right? And then the message comes back. You know, the page is literally interacting, or rather changing according to your kind of beat to beat interactions. And how it's doing that is by subscribing to events, which are basically just objects representing things that the user is doing. That's really all an event is. And you can kind of react to it in JavaScript, and it's really helpful. So if we go back to our example, we still have our hello world paragraph, and we have a button called click me. And then inside our script tag, we've now added something called an event listener. Now let's take a look at what's happening here. So document.querySelector is still finding our button element, right? There's only one in the DOM, right? But instead of changing its styles object, right? Instead, we're calling something called add event listener. This is another part of the DOM API. Every element can do this. But basically what it does is it looks, or rather waits for a particular event of the type that you specify. In our case, we're specifying one called click, right? And then it attaches a function or a callback. Colloquially, it's called a callback because the function gets executed whenever a click event happens on the button. That's very helpful, right? So whenever the user clicks the button, the browser looks through all the listeners in the DOM, and it says, oh, you're subscribed to the click event. And then it literally invokes, or rather calls, your callback function, which in this case will show an alert. And you can kind of see that on the right. Obviously, it's hard to animate how this would happen because you need to click the button to show the alert. But this is kind of the crux of it. This is how you wire together different interactions with different DOM mutations. And you'll see more examples of this as we get deeper. Okay, so now we're going to talk about something called the inspector. So the DOM inspector is basically a thing that ships with any browser that you've probably used, and it's a development tool that allows you to analyze the DOM of any page. It also allows you to mess with it, which is actually pretty cool. Like I'm sure you've seen memes or pictures where people have like taken tweets and changed their text, or gone in and messed with the page and then taken a screenshot of it, and people are like, whoa, how did you get it to do that? You may have seen something like that, you may have not, but what they're doing is they're literally hopping into DevTools and changing the makeup of the page. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to watch the Intro to Chrome's Developer Tools video. It's pretty short, but it really gets the point across as to what the strengths of Chrome's developer tools are.
Meet your new best friend, the developer tools built right into your web browser. First,
wait, hold on. Can you guys hear the sound? Okay, great.
One quick note, I suggest you use Google Chrome as your browser during our class, but every major web browser has similar developer tools built right in. My first favorite trick, anywhere on a web page, on anyone's website, not just your own, you can right-click on Windows or control-click on Mac to open a context menu. And in that menu, you'll see the word Inspect. Click Inspect, and the Elements tab of Chrome's developer tools will pop up, highlighting the portion of the HTML code corresponding to where you clicked. I can do it again to inspect this heading and see that it's an H3 tag. I can also hover my mouse over the HTML code, and I can see where each of these paragraphs are highlighted on the page. At the bottom, you can also see which style sheet rules from the CSS file apply to this particular HTML element. You can make temporary changes by clicking and typing directly in the HTML or CSS to see how that changes the web page. I love this feature. Okay, next, let's try out the browser's JavaScript console. If there's any keyboard shortcut you should memorize, It's this one. I use the console all the time. Like I said, as a web developer, this will be your new best friend. So in Chrome, on any web page, Control-Shift-J on Windows or Command-Option-J on Mac will pop open the browser console. You may see some messages or errors in here, and it's pretty fun to look under the hood of your favorite websites and see that many of them do have some bugs. You can clear out all messages by clicking this circle with a line through it. Now, most importantly, you can click and then type stuff in here. This is where you can quickly run snippets of JavaScript code to test them out. If you type something that isn't valid JavaScript, the console will yell at you with a very obvious bright red error message. Now, a quick math problem is valid JavaScript, so the console will spit out the answer. But the best part about the console is that any JavaScript code you run in here can access the HTML and CSS of the web page you're currently on. As a quick experiment, let's hack Google. If you go to google.com, then open the browser console and type document.body.textcontent, capital C, that's important, equals quote unquote, you got hacked, Google. And of course, we'll talk all about this code later on, but then press enter to run the code. And you'll see Google's entire homepage has now been replaced with the message I just typed. Pretty cool, right? And of course, it's not that easy to hack a website, thank goodness. These changes are only visible to me, and they're temporary. If I refresh the page, it just goes back to normal. So one of the most important functions you'll start using as a beginner is console.log. We'll talk more about it later, but I just want to briefly mention it. If you write, for example, console log, quote unquote, some message here inside your JavaScript file, and then you go to your web page, open it, and take a look, you'll see the message appear in the browser console. And those messages appear in the order that they're executed in your code, which can be a very helpful tool for identifying bugs, because the console serves as sort of a logbook, just like a captain's log on a ship or in Star Trek, where you see a record of everything that's happening. But this is a record of everything happening in your code. And it's a record happening, showing everything while it actually happens. Now, the developer tools built into your web browser can do so much more than this. Just the tip of the iceberg here, but should be enough to get you started. So check out Chrome's documentation and tutorials for the dev tools. There's a lot to explore there if you're curious. And let me know, as usual, if you have any questions.
All right. So that video was by a friend of mine named Liz Crane, and she's
Meet your new best friend.
And why is the video playing again? Let's see. I think things got a little messed up, so we're gonna hop back into the presentation mode. Okay, we're back. Cool.
Meet your new best friend.
Oh my gosh.
The developer tool.
We made it. We made it to the next slide. My goodness. I'm a mess today. Chrome's inspector, otherwise known as DevTools, as Liz was talking about in the video, can be used to interrogate and manipulate the DOM of any web page at all. So as you saw in the video, she went in and just literally changed the whole contents of google.com. You can just do that. In fact, as a neat little experiment, when you're on a web page that's like not responding, right? Like let's say you're buying something online and then you click add to cart and nothing's happening. It's like, oh, what is this? Oftentimes you can just pop open DevTools and in the console, it will just show you like some sort of crazy error, like indicating what's gone wrong. Also, oftentimes, like, I don't know if you've ever heard of an ad blocker, but what in a lot of cases, what an ad blocker is doing is it's just kind of using the inspector behind the scenes to like delete ads from the page. And you can actually do this manually as well. So you can go to like a page that has all sorts of ads and you can right click inspect any of the actual ads themselves and then literally delete them from the DOM, which is crazy. So yeah, the DOM is like this mutable internal representation of the visual makeup of the page. And so you can literally, just transform the appearance or the functionality of any old website if you pop open the inspector and go to town. So we're going to do that together. I'm going to show you how the inspector kind of works myself by hopping into a website and messing with it. So we're going to go to CSS Zen Garden, which is a good website for understanding how styles get applied, because they basically have like a bunch of like themes listed on the right that kind of change the appearance of the page. That isn't super relevant for what we're about to do, but I figured it was like a good playground. Okay, so I'm gonna hop out of here, and then we are gonna go to CSS Garden. Can everybody see? Excellent, excellent. Gonna pop open DevTools here. Now I gotta move the zoom window because it's in the way. There we go, close enough. Okay, so I just popped open DevTools, and what you can see right away is that you get this nice little UI kind of describing what's going on the page. So if I hover over HTML, that's the whole document. Oh my goodness. If I hover over head, it's not going to show or highlight anything, and that's because the head of the document is oftentimes not a visible element. It kind of just specifies metadata, and you can kind of see that here. The title of the page, the character set of the page, which kind of describes the makeup of the text that's going to go on the page. You might see different character sets in different languages or locales. For instance, if you go to Japan, you might see a much different character set because there are just different glyphs that they have to be able to use. So here they're loading a style sheet. Here they're loading some XML. Here they're saying, oh, the viewport should size dynamically according to what device it is. This is basically something that enables mobile devices to consume the website in a convenient and nice way. And then you see some author information, some description information, and you'll see this on most websites. The head section is really just a way of describing metadata or information that isn't necessarily like, you know, a visual part of the page, but does affect the visual parts of the page. Okay, so this is the body. This is kind of where all the visual elements live in the page. So if we take a look here, here's the page wrapper. So they have a div. So a div element is really just an element that web developers have learned to use for basically anything. And the reason for that is because div comes with basically no styling, but it is like a legal element. So it's like a nice placeholder for, I'm going to make this look some particular way, and I don't have to override like any default styles because it basically has none. And then here's a section. So section is kind of a textual idea. It usually highlights like a whole section of a website. Think like a bunch of paragraphs about one particular subject that's still just a part of the page. So as you can see, like as I'm hovering over these things, like it's kind of showing me all sorts of colorful little overlay boxes about where the element is, right? How it's offset from its parent, and what its shape is. It also tells me what its selector is. So here we're looking at div looking at a div with an ID of zen-summary and with a class of summary. The orange boxes refer to the margins, right? So every CSS element has something called a box model. And you can find out more about this because this is a very CSS-y concept, but I figure I might as well explain it because we're here. Padding and margin are used to create white space or like just a distance between a child element and its parent. So in this case, margin, which is the orange box, is kind of invisible space that the element is using to push away from its parent. Padding is kind of the same thing, but instead of pushing away from its parent, it's an element pushing down its children. And you know that you kind of have to get in and fool around with it to see the differences. But they're both useful for creating spacing. And I can just hop in here and start messing with the padding. So you can see this green region, the padding that I was talking about before. What if we wanted to make that padding like 500 pixels? Oh my gosh, I padded everything off the screen. What? What if I wanted to make it 0? I can do that too, right? What if I wanted to make this particular section, this summary, like what if I wanted to like make it invisible? Boom, it's invisible, but it's still here. You can see that because I'm selecting it right now, but you can't see it. So I can turn that off. I can also delete it entirely from the DOM. So I'm clicking on it right here. I'm right clicking now. And then I click delete element from the context menu. There it goes. It's gone. you can do all sorts of stuff like that in the inspector. Like I can change the text in this element to Sandile's garden, and there's nothing they can do to stop me. I'm a mad scientist. That's kind of the beauty of the inspector, and it's a great way to actually understand like how pages are put together. And it's one of my favorite things about the web is like it's kind of democratizing this ability to understand how great user experiences are built. You'll notice that most desktop applications don't have this capability. You can't just pop into the inspector and see how Apple's mail client is built, right? If you're on a Mac, or how the Windows system preferences window is built, right? Because they don't have an inspector. They're not built by they're not visualized with browser D.O.M. And so you can't mess with them or understand how they work quite as easily. So yeah, that's kind of the strength of the inspector. So I think we're gonna head back to the talk and move on to some examples about how we interact with the D.O.M. There we are. Present. Okay, now it's time for some live code. So we're going to use the tool called Glitch, which is pretty cool. It's kind of a web-based code editor to mess with some D.O.M elements and build something of a login form. It won't actually do anything, but I think it's important to visualize like the process of actually putting HTML and JavaScript and CSS together, right? And building up a website, from those component parts, and you'll see firsthand like how integral to the process understanding the D.O.M is. Okay, so we're gonna go to Glitch now. Glitch looks a little something like this. Looks like it lost connection. So we're just gonna go ahead and refresh it. So it's loading the project. This always takes a little bit, but be patient with it. So Glitch feels a lot like a local text editor like VS Code, which is one of the most popular code editors out there in the game. But Glitch is nice because you can actually preview your code like off to the right here. And it's kind of just like a really integral experience. And I see somebody joined my Glitch session. Welcome. Be sure not to move anything around though, because it does mess with the a Glitch has like a collaborative feature, but it's like a little half-baked. So definitely be careful. Don't get too crazy in here. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna create a div in here for organizing two input boxes, a login box and a password box. And then we're gonna kind of wire up its events and then maybe add a submit button. So instead of having all this stuff here, maybe we'll keep the heading because we like nice greetings, right? We're gonna add a div called column, right? And it looks a little something like that. You'll notice that it's completely invisible, right? But that's because it has no content. And that's one of the beautiful things about divs is they have no inherent styling. So they're kind of just like a vanilla element. You can use them for anything. And everything, and they're kind of the default, so to speak. So I'm gonna put an input here of type text, and so that's a text box. So it looks a little something like that, and you can kind of see it right here. Boom, text box. That's exactly what we want. So let's wrap this in another div so that we can put a label next to it. So let's do something like, we'll call this field because it kind of wraps a field. So let's close this div. Awesome. We're gonna put our input in here. Awesome, great. Then we're gonna wrap this, or we're gonna add another div for a label because we want to know what this field is. It's all well and good having a text field, but it's not very helpful if you have no idea what it's for. So here comes a label. Right, we're going to give that a class of label. So all of these classes that you're seeing are literally so that I can style it later, and that's pretty much the whole point of it. I'm going to go in after this into style.css, and I'm going to give everything kind of a look and feel that matches the use case that we're working with, which is we're building a login form. So let's say this is your username. Beautiful. Excellent. Okay. So let's add another field for password. Awesome. So that's another power of HTML. It's very composable. So that basically just means that you can copy and paste stuff really easily without context, and it will just kind of work. So you can see that this is a little claustrophobic, right? Look how close everything is together. Let's breathe some air into this. Let's add some spacing. So we can see that we have a column, label, field, like all of these classes, and these are basically going to shape how we style our content in the next step. So here we have a div element. In fact, let's pop open the inspector so we can take a look at this. Inspect. Awesome. So you can see like this column div that we've been working with is definitely here. Let's get a little breathing room here. But it's important to keep track of the DOM underlying your page so that you can style it and interact with it in JavaScript correctly. So let's add some styling for our column element, and let's make it display flex. You don't really have to know particularly what this does, but it basically changes the layout algorithm that the column div uses to lay out its children. So display flex basically just puts things all in a row or all in a column for the most part. The default is a row, so we need to flex direction, column. Okay, so this should stack it, yep, and we're back to putting it vertically. This may look exactly like what we started with, but in reality, Flex has a lot more rules and functionality that are generally more forgiving than the defaults. So I like to use it in cases like these. So now we want to make our inputs have a little bit of space, right? We want them to push away from the element above them. So what we're going to do is we're going to go inside input and we're going to add some margin top to it. We're going to give it a margin top of 10 pixels. Uh-oh. We're back. Great. So now we have a little bit of spacing, but like it's still a little tight on the bottom of each field. So let's actually make it margin top and margin bottom. Awesome. Okay. Beautifully spaced, ready to rock. Beautiful. Okay. In fact, these labels are looking a little plain. So let's make them a little thicker. Font weight, bold. Excellent. So now our labels look a little bit more, substantial, we'll say. So that's great. I'm still typing in here, and I'm typing in here, and that still works. So maybe it's time to look at some JavaScript. Actually, there's one thing I forgot. Let's add a button. Like, what's the use of a form without a button? So let's get a button in here. Button. Submit. Let's put this all in one line. There's no reason to spread this out. Okay, so this submit button looks a little crazy because it's huge. I'm just gonna rein it in. We're gonna make it a little bit less wide. So let's give it a max width of 50%. So what that does is it says, what's my parent's width, right? And then it says, I'm going to make my max width half of that, no matter what it is. And that's the power of CSS as well. It's like you can really move things around and it will look great if you spend enough time on it. Okay, so right now the console is actually just printing hi. So let's go check out the console right quick. Because we refreshed the page so many times, it's saying hello a lot. Let's change this logic up to be a little bit more useful. So let's go in document.querySelector So this is what we had going on in the talk earlier, like in the slides. We can go and find a button, add an event listener to it. And let's make this event listener click. This syntax is just creating a new function. That arrow looking thing is just saying this is a function. Let's put this down here so we can see all of it at once. Okay, and let's make console.log hi happen only when we click the button. How about that? So when I click here, oh, boom, we've added some functionality. How dynamic is this? Boom, 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 boom. 7 highs. We're automating. So this works because our query selector, right, is literally selecting the button. It's basically going out and finding our button element and then returning it so that we can add an event listener to it later. So let's do the same thing, but with our text fields. But before we do that, we need some way of identifying them because there are 2 text fields. Like, how do we know which one is which? So let's go back to our HTML quickly. And we'll give them some IDs so we can call them by their name, so to speak. So let's call this username. Ooh, username field. Awesome. So that's the username field. And then this is, we're going to call this our password field. Password field. Muy bien. Okay, so now we can add some dope event listeners to our username and password fields very easily. So how document.querySelector works is it uses the same selector language that CSS selectors use. So if you want to select something by an ID, you put a hash, right? And then you put its ID right after the hash. So in our case, username field. Awesome. So that's going to select our username field, which is great. Oh, I completely forgot to delete our annoying hi message every time we refresh the page. So what do we want to do with this username field? What we want to do is we want to add an event listener to this field, listener, right? But we want to listen to when it changes, right? And the reason for this is mostly just to show you how it works. But sometimes you want to make sure that the contents of your fields have some stuff in it before the user can hit submit. Because sometimes the user might like just go to hit the button without actually filling out the username and password. And that's just not a great user experience because obviously that's going to fail. It's just empty and empty. Let's only enable the submit button when the username field has data. So change. Awesome. So we're going to keep this event here. And we're going to console.log its value. So a value colon and then e.target.value. Okay. So let's clear the console and take a look at what it's doing over here. It's not working. I wonder why. Console.log. Okay, so that's username field. Username field is the right ID. Very, very strange. So now you're going to see me do some live debugging. Basically, what's supposed to happen here is we're supposed to be selecting our first field, the username field, then adding an event listener, and then console logging whenever its value changes. Let's see, add event listener change. Perhaps I can just do the first input and we'll see how that goes. So let's go back to our console. Now, well, that's still working, but this part is not working. Change, maybe value. Nope. That's funky. I'm not sure why that's not working. But in any case, this is basically how events are wired up in a page, is you use events to mutate the DOM. So for instance, if we wanted to, I don't know, add some padding to the left of our button when we click it, instead of saying hi, which might be a little bit more interesting, we might do something like this. dot styles dot padding left equals 20 pixels. So what this does is when you click on the button, it selects that same button and then changes its styling to have padding left. So boom. Oh, that's not working. Styles dot. I'm such a mess today. I think it's just style. Let's try that. Interesting. That's not working either. What? In any case, this would normally work. I think there's a problem with glitch. I'm going to blame the tool. But basically, you can subscribe to events and then manipulate the DOM inside those callbacks and build really intuitive, engaging experiences with JavaScript. And that's kind of the power of the DOM. So we're going to go back to the talk now. And do you have any questions? I'm going to go and take a look at chat to see if anybody has any sort of questions for me.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so how do you with, I think you're using Glitch, right? So how would you get that to actually work as a web?
So Glitch is a good example of how like a normal setup would work. But really what you would normally do is you'd have something called a web server that basically just serves your HTML file, your CSS file, and your JavaScript file. And that would be like much more normal. Luckily, there are a bunch of great tutorials on like how to set up a local web server for development. So I'll be sure to put a link in the chat, at the end of the question session with like a nice little tutorial on how to get started on that.
Thank you.
No problemo. Any other questions?
Wait, I have another question, but like, could you go back to the glitch code thing?
Yeah.
Like, with the div element, right? Does that have a closing tag? Because like I saw you using it, but then like in some parts there was no closing tag, and I was just like, wait, so.
Can you elaborate on what you mean? So you're talking about which
like,
div element?
The div class thing.
This one?
Yeah. So okay. Is it supposed to always have the closing tag?
Yes, and it does actually on line 29. So this div closes this opening tag. So how you can tell is like I'm going to collapse this div right here with this handy dandy glitch tool. Boom. So now you can see that the div element is entirely collapsed. And everything inside of it is just what's called a child element of this div. And that's pretty much just how it works. Like so if I got rid of all of this, right, this is basically what the div looks like. And everything inside it is just its children. Like, so if you look on the right there, that's the child of the div now. It's just some text. But I can make the child of the div anything. I can make it a button, for example. Or I could make it what we had before, which is just divs of divs of divs, right? So in this case, the children of this div is like another div with the contents of username and like another div after that, which has another input and so on and so forth.
Oh, okay, I get it now. Thank you.
Yeah, so if you go back to that idea that I was talking about before, which is that the DOM is a tree, you can kind of see it if you kind of squint your eyes. Like it kind of looks like a hierarchy. Like it's, you're starting out here and then it kind of gets indented and now you're slightly inner and then it gets indented again. And like we're really deep now. Like this is kind of what a tree looks like. The further you go down level wise, the deeper you get into the tree. And that's actually how the browser makes sense of it as well. Like this oh boy, elements. So I'm going to drop this. So if you look at the actual inspector, like you'll see exactly that. it looks exactly like a tree. Like we start higher out in the tree, and it's kind of higher level, so it's encompassing more of the DOM. And then as we kind of drill in, like it gets more and more specific. And we can see the parent-child relationship between each of these nodes. All righty. Any other questions?
Wait, am I allowed to ask another question?
Yeah, keep it coming.
Okay.
What else you got?
So when you're like building a website, right? Is it that like you just copy a bunch of these I don't remember what it's called, inspector code, or do you have to write it from scratch?
Well, oftentimes you're mostly writing it from scratch. Like the inspector is really just how you like look at a web page that already exists. But if you're trying to build one up, right, you got to do it within an HTML file. You got to do it by adding some CSS to your CSS file. You need to do it by adding some JavaScript. Like it's definitely like this process of like building up the website by writing the requisite parts. And it's basically like text files that kind of make up the website. Yeah, the inspector is really just like for messing with it and seeing what's wrong, not necessarily for the creative aspect. Yeah. So I might as well just go and look for like a nice little tutorial on getting started with creating a local web server. Getting started with, and this is something you'll see pretty much any developer do. It's like whenever you have a question, just start typing in Google, right? And what you'll notice is the difference between entry-level developers and more experienced ones is how good their Google queries are. I'm not even joking. Like like we don't ever really know that much. We're only really as good as the information we can find. So it's really important to be good at that. So getting started with web app development. Let's see. Okay, so this is MDN. It's called the Mozilla Developer Network. I highly recommend it whenever it comes up in your Google search results because they make really fantastic content. So this tutorial will basically take you through the basics of getting started with your first website. So this is what I'll link in the chat. So if you're interested in making a web app or a website, this will give you some great fundamental information to help guide your journey, I would say. But yeah, if you have any other further questions, just feel free to send me an email. I forgot to put my contact information on the slides, but it's boom. There it is. Shoot me an email. I'm notoriously slow at responding, but I will eventually get there. Yeah, I'm happy to direct you in whatever direction you need. And if you have like a complicated problem, I can probably point you to some resources that might help you out.
If there are no other questions, then I think we can probably wrap up for today. Cool. Thank you so much for taking the time and putting so much energy into these awesome slides.
Glad you like them.
Yeah, no, I loved it. And I hope everyone else loved it as much as I did. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. Everybody have a great holiday season and a happy new year. See you around.
All right. Bye, everyone.